Names are very important things, are they not? Many of you may not be aware, but my official real name is Perry Alexander Thornburg III. You might be, everybody impressed? I know I was. And so the story is, every name, that impressed enough there. But as you know, I go by Alex. So I always thought it was kind of fun growing up to have two names. And the story my mother told me, of course, being a third, my mom told me the story was that I was named after my grandfather and my father. But she said, but I wanted to be sure that you didn't have to bear the burden of that name. And so I didn't like the idea that you'd be called Perry. So she said, I will let you call him Perry Alexander Thornburg III if he goes by Alex. And so, thus, I have two names I carry with me. It's always a little bizarre. My official United States IRS name is Perry Alexander Thornburg III, and my friends and family, of course, call me Alex. I always find it a little odd when I'm at the doctor's office that it takes me a while to recognize when they're calling out Perry, that they're calling out my name. But names are important. In fact, they convey something about family and our culture, and our names are stories in and of themselves, usually, that our families have come up with. And it says something about the region we're from, or what culture, what country is even conveyed by our very name. So if I lifted up the names Rodriguez, or names like Shin, or names like Daisy May, you kind of have a sense of where that might have come from, right? And so names do convey something about who we are and where we're from, and each of our names probably has some story connected to it in certain ways. We as parents, we know the importance of names that we kind of wrestle with, and we'll look at long books of lists, or we'll really struggle to come up with a name because we know those kids are going to be, our children are going to be stuck with those names. And so we find relatives we want to remember or honor by lifting up their names. And we know these kids will be stuck with those names the rest of their lives, unless, of course, they're the artist formerly known as Prince, or unless, of course, they become a famous actor. I know I'm still traumatized when I learned that the real name for John Wayne, my hero, was Maurice Morrison. Just doesn't have the same kind of punch. But names do. They have power. They are in some ways an expression of who we are and how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. They are an expression. Our name is an expression that is significant to us. It has power. In fact, it's meaningful to us when people remember our names, right? It's as if there's an acknowledgement that we exist, that we are real. And it's also problematic and hurts when people don't remember our names. The power of a name is just evident and ever present. It's like saying, "Hey, you," in the red shirt there, as opposed to knowing that person. A name has power. And I'll be honest, that's why this first part of the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, I have never liked that opening phrase to the Lord's Prayer. Because to me, at least as I have said that Sunday after Sunday, to me, that opening phrase, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, seems to be calling the name of God is Father. And the truth is, in the Christian church, in our church, we use Father a lot to refer to God. We we do refer in prayer and in our worship and liturgy, we use the image of Father, and that's fine and good enough. It does, as a metaphor, it does convey something meaningful about who we're saying God is, but in many ways, culturally, to the gender application of Father to God implies some kind of hierarchy, some kind of distance, depending on one's culture. Now, it may depend on one's own personal experience of your father, whether that's a more intimate, meaningful term for you, but it seems awfully problematic that we use Father to name God, and that it seems Jesus is using that name. If you really want to see how tied in we are to that term, what if I bet it would kind of tick some people off if we began the Lord's Prayer every Sunday by saying, "Our Mother, who art in heaven." So we do assign the name Father to God. And that, to me, in many ways, culturally, theologically, has an image of strong distance, if you think about it. Now, many of us might be lucky to have had fathers who were far more connected to us, but many of us didn't. So can that name have any meaning for us? And the truth is, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, really implies distance between us and God, right? Our Father who art in heaven, holy be your name. So I'll be honest, I have never, even as a kid, liked the opening of this prayer. But hopefully you'll keep me on as your pastor for a little bit longer. Now, the story we read this morning, the story of Moses at the burning bush, he comes to that burning bush, and it's one of the few stories that talks about the name of God. And as I read this story, it probably jogged for you the memory, the truth that here's this voice that says, "I hear my people's cry. I'm going to send you to go let my people go. Tell the Pharaoh, let my people go." And Moses, in good, very human fashion, says, "Who, me? How am I going to do that?" And then he comes up, and truthfully, I do the same thing. Who do I say sent me to free the people? Who do I say? What's your name now? And the line in Hebrew is Yahweh. And that means, and can mean, like 2 or 3 different things. It can mean I am who I am, or it can be I will be who I will be, or it can just simply be I am. And the way the Hebrews understood this is that God's name is so holy, so sacred, that you're not even supposed to say it. Do you know that? That in our Jewish brothers and sisters, the name of God is so other, so outside our ways of comprehending, that to even try to capture God's name in one word is sacrilegious. And so when the Hebrews read the scripture, when the Jewish people read their scripture, they pause every time God's name appears. And they are silent, and then they go on. There's nothing more sacred than the name of God, and so holy and honorable, one should be very careful about what one names God. And so what struck me about that is that seems so contradictory to what Jesus seems to be kind of communicating about who God is, unless we understood that Jesus is less about naming God than something far more profound. Jesus, raised in this tradition in which God's name is so holy and sacred, it is not to be used glibly. And yet Jesus tells his disciples, when you call on God, say, Our Father, and the Aramaic word here is Abba. Now, Abba, some scholars have interpreted that Abba, this term Abba, to be daddy or papa, a very intimate kind of term there. There are some scholars who say that's not necessarily true, but it does convey a sense of intimacy. It does communicate a sense of intimacy about who we call God and what we call God. And what strikes me about the opening of this prayer is that Jesus holds this paradox both of the holiness of God and an intimacy with God in tension. And the most important words in this text is not Father, it's the very first word. Our Father. Now that may not seem like a very profound thing, but the truth is, by praying Our Father, you're praying a couple of things. One is, no prayer is ever just a personal prayer, right? We may go off to our closet and close the door and say the prayer, and we may say the Lord's Prayer. It's not my Father, it's our Father. Our Dad. And so the profound nature of what Jesus is trying to communicate is that it's our shared humanity under a God who created us. In a sense, our Abba is emphasizing not the name of God, but of our shared relationship as the children of God. It's about our connection as human beings, defined by a relationship of one who created us all. And the line, who art in heaven, seems to me to be more a description. We tend to think of heaven as this far-off place, but anybody who knows Jesus knows he saw heaven everywhere all around him. That everywhere he looked, heaven existed. It existed in a father who welcomed a wayward child. It existed in a woman at a well. It existed in these poor in spirit in the morning. Heaven existed all around. It wasn't just some far-off place, but is present in everyday life. And so what we have really ultimately is not our Father who art in heaven, this image of a distant God far away, but really what Jesus is trying to create is this sense of intimacy between those who pray it, and the sense of connection to each other and to the heaven and the world around us. And what does it mean to make holy God's name? It's to recognize, I think, in each other that sense of holiness of God, in each, that shared humanity, that shared childhood under God. To hold that as holy. I know I've shared with many of you this sense of, or I've told you about a French philosopher named Emmanuel Levinas, who was also a Jewish rabbi. And Levinas was a really interesting person who lived about the mid-20th century, had different ideas about the way philosophy and theology should go, but one of the things that he claimed, one of the things that he articulated in being a Jewish rabbi, is that we should always honor and hold holy the otherness in other people. That anytime we think we know another person fully, whether that's God or each other, that in a sense we kind of murder them. That in a sense we don't hold as holy their otherness. So no matter if you've been married 30 years, no matter if you've known someone your whole life, you cannot claim you know another person totally. and that to honor the holiness of that person, to honor the holiness of God in that person, is to know you don't know them completely. And think about how often we tend to assume that we know people by a political slogan on a hat, by a posting on Facebook. Think about how often we kind of murder their otherness and don't hold holy this shared humanity we have with Abba. A shared, loving humanity we have that crosses religious lines, that crosses all the theological boxes. I think the story of the Bible and the story of the Lord's Prayer in many ways is always shattering the boxes we want to put God in. It's always about it. There's a line that says, if God thinks like you do, or if God looks like you, then you know you've made God in your own image. And so the opening to hold God holy, to hold each other holy, is to honor that otherness and not to try to destroy. And so our first step into prayer is both an invitation to intimacy with God, but also a sense in which we are to hold holy and know God can never be captured by our phrases, by our metaphors. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.